Nintendo followed up the NES with a controller that introduced shoulder triggers and a 4-button face, a physical layout that virtually every modern controller still uses today. This graphic shows the official Super Nintendo library. Out of 1,757 published games, a modern player looking to revisit the system faces an overwhelming paradox of choice. By the time that massive library filters down to the absolute essentials, you are left with a surprisingly concentrated pile of gold cartridges. The problem with diving back into that pile is human memory. Our brains naturally edit out the friction of the 1990s. We remember the vibrant colors and the incredible music, but we conveniently forget the archaic menu systems, the brutal difficulty spikes designed to extend rental periods, and the clunky control schemes. To accurately evaluate what is worth playing today, we have to throw out nostalgia entirely. We need to filter this library strictly by its modern return on investment, measuring the exact value a game provides in exchange for your limited free time. Your dilemma as an adult with a schedule isn't finding a good game. Your dilemma is identifying which specific masterworks actually respect the constraints of your current life. In the early 1990s, Nintendo found its total market dominance under serious threat. Competitors had beaten them to the 16-bit market, and the technological gap was becoming obvious. Sega released the Genesis and aggressively targeted teenagers, building an entire marketing campaign around raw hardware speed. They coined the term blast processing to highlight the sheer velocity their machine could handle. The irony of that hardware war is that Sega was actually right. The central processor inside the Super Nintendo, the Ricoh 5A22, was noticeably slower than the CPU inside the Genesis. In games that required complex physics or rapid sprite movement, the Nintendo hardware struggled, frequently causing severe on-screen slowdown. To compensate for that sluggish central processor, Nintendo's engineers had to rethink their approach to the hardware itself. Their solution was co-processing. Instead of forcing the console to do all the heavy lifting, Nintendo allowed developers to embed extra processing chips directly into the game cartridges. Because developers couldn't rely on raw speed, they were forced into a corner. They had to compensate with pristine art direction, highly advanced audio, and flawless level design to maintain their edge. By 1993, the industry was desperately trying to transition into 3D. Nintendo partnered with Argonaut Games to create the Super FX chip, a dedicated graphics accelerator inside the cartridge that allowed the Super Nintendo to render rudimentary 3D polygons. At the time, seeing real-time 3D on a home console was shocking. But to achieve it, the hardware had to compromise everywhere else. The polygons were flat, untextured, and often ran at single-digit frame rates that struggled to keep up with player inputs. The modern return on investment for these 3D pioneers is remarkably low. Stripped of their historical context, playing them today often results in physical motion sickness. Compare that to the studios that used enhancement chips, like the SA1 and DSP-1, to double down on what the system already did well. Instead of faking 3D, they used the extra processing power to push massive, vibrant 2D sprites, complex enemy AI, and smooth pseudo-3D scaling. Titles like Super Mario RPG and Super Mario Kart utilized this approach. They used the hardware to crunch numbers for colorful, highly detailed environments that moved cleanly and reacted instantly to the controller. This chart maps technical novelty against modern return on investment. You can see the distinct split. Titles pushing hardest for 3D novelty sit firmly at the bottom of the modern enjoyment scale, while refined 2D titles sit firmly at the top. The hardware tricks meant to simulate the future aged terribly. The tricks meant to perfect the present aged flawlessly. That pursuit of perfection is most obvious in the console's action and exploration games, specifically in the design philosophy of Super Metroid. Super Metroid presents the player with massive, interconnected, non-linear maps. It offers zero hand-holding, drops you into an atmosphere of total isolation, and forces you to build a mental map of the entire alien planet to figure out where your newly acquired weapons can unlock previous barriers. The modern trade-off of this brilliant design is its high barrier to entry. It demands total mental bandwidth. If you step away from the game for a week to deal with real life, you will return completely lost, heavily penalized by the very design that makes the game great. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the physics-based, momentum-heavy platforming of Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country. These games rely on tight reflex challenges, branching paths, and hidden exits. You can complete a level in 3 minutes, save your progress, and put the controller down. They offer immediate accessibility, but they deliberately lack deep cerebral immersion. Look at this side-by-side comparison matrix. On the left, the exploration model maximizes cognitive load and spatial memory. On the right, the platforming model maximizes instant gratification and drop-in accessibility. Choosing between these masterworks comes down entirely to your schedule. You have to decide if your modern lifestyle allows for deep cerebral immersion or if you require immediate, bite-sized engagement. The Super Nintendo is widely considered the golden age of the Japanese role-playing game, a period where massive narrative ambition constantly fought against the physical storage limits of a cartridge. Chrono Trigger bypasses those limits through sheer efficiency. Built by an all-star development team, it is a lean, completely filler-free adventure spanning multiple timelines, requiring you to actively change the past to alter the future. Because it finishes its story in about 25 hours, Chrono Trigger sets an impossibly high standard. Playing it today easily ruins your tolerance for modern RPGs that artificially bloat their runtimes to hit the 100-hour mark. But the secret weapon that made these 16-bit epics feel emotionally resonant wasn't the graphics. It was the console's dedicated 8-bit audio sampler chip, the Sony SPC700. Designed in secret by Sony engineer Ken Kutaragi, who would later go on to create the PlayStation, this chip allowed the console to play back compressed digital recordings of real instruments instead of simple synthesized beeps. In games like Final Fantasy VI, developers used a hardware-level filter to give these audio samples a warm, orchestral quality. Those sweeping soundtracks actively masked the friction of the era. The music was so compelling it distracted you from the high rate of random enemy encounters and the incredibly archaic menu systems. Playing SNES RPGs today forces a clear choice. You either choose the flawless pacing and efficiency of Chrono Trigger, or you accept the mechanical friction of Final Fantasy VI in order to experience its cinematic prestige. The smartest way to approach the Super Nintendo library today is to stop treating it as a backlog you need to conquer and start treating it as a tailored toolset. This flowchart operates like an overworld map. Time-poor optimizers follow this route to zero-grind games like Chrono Trigger for maximum return. Game design historians route here, where Super Metroid's friction provides an educational experience. Arcade reflex players stick to Street Fighter II for instant rewards. The true value of this library isn't found in blind completionism, it's found entirely through curation. The hardware constraints of the 1990s forced developers to prioritize pixel-perfect art direction and melodic sound over raw processing power, creating an aesthetic that bypasses technical obsolescence. Each cartridge functions as a curated tool for entertainment, offering a self-contained solution for a specific type of player that remains practical decades later.